If you live long enough, you'll realize some family relationships are not just strange, they're downright disturbing. I've seen my daughter-in-law do something so horrifying it still makes my skin crawl. Since that night, I haven't had a single peaceful sleep. I tried to help her rebuild her life, but she repaid kindness with cruelty and nearly ended mine. If you want to know why I'm still alive to tell this story, stay with me until the end of today's video. My dear viewers, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video to support me. Every Sunday used to be my favorite day. The house smelled of cinnamon rolls and laughter from my grandchildren filled the air like music. But lately, Sundays had gone silent. My son Austin and his wife Peyton always found a reason not to come. At first, I thought they were just busy. Work the kids' church. Life happens, I told myself. Yet the excuses grew thinner each week, until even a polite phone call became rare. I started leaving my dining table set for 4, hoping they might surprise me. They never did. I am Daisy Mitchell, 68 years old, a retired internist who once spent her life healing others. My neighbors still greet me with respect. In Charleston's medical community, people remember my years of service and call me a woman of grace. But at night, when I sit alone by the lamp, I can't help wondering when grace became loneliness. Since my husband passed 5 years ago, I've lived quietly in a modest house just a few blocks from Austin's, close enough to help when needed, far enough to give them space. My finances are steady. I live on a reliable pension, my late husband's savings, and some government bonds. I never flaunt it, but somehow everyone seems to know. Peyton once joked at dinner that I was the family's backup bank. I laughed then, though something about her smile unsettled me. It was the kind of smile that hides calculation behind warmth. Neighbors often say, I'm lucky. They see the roses in my front yard, the polished floors, the framed family photos, and think I have everything. But they don't see the unopened text messages, the cold plates of Sunday roast, or the ache of waiting for voices that never arrive. Last Sunday, when the clock struck noon and the phone stayed silent, I stood by the window, watching the street. A delivery truck stopped in front of Austin's house. Peyton stepped out holding shopping bags from a luxury store. She looked radiant, carefree. My heart sank. Something had changed, something small but sharp, like the first crack in glass before it shatters. That was the day I realized my Sundays were no longer mine. They had vanished quietly without farewell. And in their place, a question began to haunt me. What else might disappear next? My son's family looked perfect from the outside, the kind of perfection that neighbors admired and magazines loved to write about. Austin Walsh. My only child was 36, a resident doctor in the surgical department at St. Mary's Hospital. He was brilliant, hardworking, and endlessly tired. His schedule consumed him early rounds at dawn emergency calls at midnight, so much so that home had become more of a pit stop than a refuge. Still, I was proud every time someone mentioned his name with admiration. Dr. Walsh saved another patient, they would say, and my heart would swell a little. His wife, Peyton Quinn, was 33. She had once trained as a nurse but left her career after their first child was born. Family comes first, she used to say, smiling in that warm, composed way of hers. She devoted herself entirely to raising Emma 7 and little Caleb 4. The children were beautiful, Emma, with her father's calm eyes, and Caleb with a smile that could melt any heart. Peyton kept the house spotless, the children well-dressed, and every detail under control. In our neighborhood, she was the woman everyone wanted to befriend. Whenever the neighbors hosted gatherings, Peyton would glide in wearing her floral dresses, her hair perfectly curled, her lipstick soft and tasteful. She'd bring homemade cupcakes or lemon tarts, compliment everyone she met, and speak in that gentle, honeyed tone that made people instantly like her. Austin's wife is just lovely people, often told me. He's a lucky man. And I believed them. Whenever I visited the house, always smelled of cinnamon and fresh laundry. Peyton would greet me with a polite hug, offer me tea, and ask about my health. "You must be proud of Austin," she'd say, smiling sweetly as if she truly meant it. I'd watch her move gracefully around the kitchen, arranging snacks for the children, humming softly, a picture of calm domestic grace. I often told my friends, "My son married well. She's thoughtful, organized, a wonderful mother." There was no reason to think otherwise. Sometimes I'd sit quietly on the porch swing, watching Peyton playing with the kids, on the lawn, her laughter bright, her sundress catching the afternoon light, and think what a blessing this family is. I didn't know then that perfection can be the finest disguise for distance, or that behind a gentle smile can hide an emptiness no one dares to name. But for that moment, I was content. I believed my son was happy. And as a mother, that belief felt enough. Lately, little things had begun to trouble me so small, they almost seemed silly to question. Peyton, who used to be the first one to remind the family about Sunday service, had suddenly stopped going. She was once the woman who made the children kneel beside their beds every night to recite the Lord's Prayer. Now she said church was too crowded, or that the pastor's sermons had become repetitive. Instead, she would leave home early every Sunday, dressed elegantly, perfume strong enough to fill the hallway before she even stepped out. When I asked where she was going, she smiled lightly and said she was visiting her father at the nursing home. At first, I admired her devotion. Not everyone cared for their parents that way, and I even offered to join her one weekend. She hesitated, then declined, saying her father wasn't comfortable with visitors lately. The way she said it felt rehearsed, like a line she'd practiced in front of the mirror. Still, I didn't press. A mother-in-law questioning her daughter-in-law too much could easily be labeled as intrusive. Then came the requests, small, reasonable, at least at first. Dad needs new vitamins. The nursing home raised their service fee. They said his room needs repairs. She always sounded rushed, almost embarrassed, as if she hated asking. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I'd always thought of Peyton as a good wife and caring mother. But the amounts grew larger and the explanations blurrier. When I offered to pay the nursing home directly, she said it would just confuse the billing system. One Sunday after she left, in her usual hurry, I noticed a faint scent of new perfume lingering in the kitchen, musky and expensive, not the soft floral kind she used to wear. Later that afternoon, I called the nursing home out of pure concern. The receptionist sounded puzzled. "Oh, Mrs. Walsh, we haven't seen his daughter in weeks. She usually just wires the payments." My hand went cold around the phone. That night, as I washed the dinner dishes, I couldn't stop thinking about her glossy lipstick, her new gold bracelet, the faint shimmer of guilt in her eyes whenever I mentioned money. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe grief was making me suspicious. But as I looked at the dark window reflection staring back at me, I whispered to myself, half afraid, half certain, something about Peyton wasn't right. If you see me sitting here calmly, know that I've just discovered something that will keep me awake for the rest of my life. I speak these words not with anger, but with a kind of clinical detachment, the way a doctor describes a disease she's diagnosed in herself. Maybe that's what years of medicine have done to me, trained me to stay composed while watching something die, even if that something is trust. I remember the way Peyton used to hold my hands at the dinner table, her palms warm, her smile sweet and steady. "Mom," she would say softly, "I'm so grateful you taught me what real love looks like." Those words used to fill me with pride. I thought I had raised a son who married a kind woman, someone who valued family, who respected age and goodness. I used to think love was visible in the way she served me tea or brushed the crumbs off the table before I could. Now, when I replay those moments, each gesture feels rehearsed, like lines in a play that fooled even the writer. I never imagined that the same woman who kissed my cheek every Sunday could hide secrets sharp enough to cut through my sleep. There were signs, of course, but I dismissed them. Her evasive eyes, her polished nails, her sudden generosity that never quite reached sincerity. I told myself not to judge, not to be one of those mothers-in-law who see malice in every shadow. But sometimes the shadows are exactly where the truth hides. Tonight, I sit by the lamp in my quiet kitchen, the ticking clock louder than my own heartbeat. The air smells faintly of lavender and something else, something metallic, bitter, like the taste of realization. I look at the empty chair across from me, the one she used to occupy, and I feel a calm so deep, it frightens me. This is not peace. It is the stillness before a storm, the silence between the last breath and the scream that follows. You see, betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives dressed in kindness, carrying a cup of tea, whispering thank you. And by the time you recognize it, it's already taken something from you that no medicine can restore. That Sunday afternoon, Peyton came home later than usual. The sun had already dipped low, painting the street in shades of orange and gray. I was sitting in the living room pretending to read, though my eyes hadn't moved on the same line for 20 minutes. When she walked in, I looked up and something inside me tightened. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair slightly tangled, and there was a faint smudge of lipstick near her collar. It wasn't the kind of mess a woman gets from visiting her father in a nursing home. It was the kind that comes from hurry, from nerves, from secrets. Austin was at the kitchen counter, helping our youngest with his math homework. When Peyton entered, he smiled, unaware of anything unusual. "Did you have a nice visit with your dad?" he asked. She froze for a second, then answered flatly, "Yeah, he's getting weaker," and quickly changed the subject. Her tone was clipped. Her movements rushed. She avoided my eyes when she passed behind me to set her purse on the table. I caught a faint whiff of perfume, sharp, unfamiliar, not the soft scent she usually wore. Later that evening, while cleaning the table, I noticed a small, crumpled receipt that had fallen from her bag. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but I unfolded it anyway. Gas station, 3:42 p.m. The address wasn't anywhere near the nursing home. It was across town near the marina. My heart thudded once heavy and slow. I told myself there could be an explanation. Maybe she got lost. Maybe she stopped for coffee. Maybe I was imagining things again. But deep down, I knew. Mothers know. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in the living room with only the lamp and the ticking clock. The family photos lined the mantel, Austin's wedding day, the grandchildren's school pictures, my late husband, smiling in his doctor's coat. I looked at them one by one, feeling the weight of something fragile breaking inside me. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost cold, but my hands were trembling. If my instincts were right, nothing would ever be the same again. I whispered it into the quiet room, a promise more than a thought. Then I made my decision. Next Sunday, I wouldn't stay home waiting for them to visit. I would follow her. I needed the truth no matter how much it hurt. People often said we were the kind of family others looked up to. The Walshes, steady, successful, respectable. When neighbors passed by our house in Charleston, they'd slow their steps, smiling at the perfect picture we unknowingly painted the two-story brick home with white shutters, the neatly trimmed lawn, the shining black SUV in the driveway, and the sound of children's laughter spilling from the porch. It looked like a postcard of happiness. Austin. My only son is 36 now, a surgical resident at one of Charleston's best hospitals. He works long hours, sometimes days without rest. Even when he comes home, he smells faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. He's a good man, though the kind who believes love is measured by effort and financial stability. Mom, he once told me, If I can provide for them, I'm doing my job. I never argued. I knew how hard medicine could be. But sometimes, watching him rush through dinner, checking patient charts between bites, I wondered if he knew how lonely responsibility can feel. Peyton, his wife, used to be a nurse before she quit to raise the children. People said she was the perfect homemaker, polite, well-dressed with a smile that seemed made for photographs. Every morning, she packed Emma's lunchbox with handwritten notes and braided Caleb's hair while humming. She loved being praised for her devotion, though lately I've noticed she posts more about sacrifices than about love. I used to think she and Austin balanced each other, his practicality and her charm. Now I'm not so sure. Emma is 7, sweet and curious, always asking questions about everything. Caleb is 4, mischievous, his laughter like bells. They adore their parents, and when they visit me, the house feels alive again. Watching them run across my garden always fills me with warmth, the kind of joy that makes you forget pain for a moment. To outsiders, we were flawless. Austin with his white coat and calm smile. Peyton with her grace. 2 beautiful children. And me, the proud mother, retired doctor, standing just behind them, like the final brushstroke on a perfect painting. I believed their happiness was my life's reward, the proof that kindness and hard work never go unpaid. But perfection has a strange way of hiding its cracks. From the sidewalk, you could never see the tiredness in Austin's eyes or the restlessness in Peyton's smile. You couldn't hear the silence that crept into their kitchen after the children went to bed. And you certainly couldn't see the quiet unease that had begun to take root in my heart. Money has a strange way of tying people together even when love should be enough. Austin earns well, better than most, really, but with his long hours at the hospital, he leaves the household matters to Peyton. And Peyton, with that gentle voice and sweet smile, always knows how to make a complaint sound like a confession. Mom, she would sigh, resting her hand on mine. Raising kids these days costs so much more than people realize. Tuition, daycare, groceries, everything's doubled. At first I wanted to help. What mother wouldn't? I had my pension, a few bonds my husband left behind, and a lifetime habit of saving carefully. Writing a check for the children's school fees felt natural, even joyful. I started picking up groceries for them, organic fruits, good milk, vitamins for the kids. When Peyton forgot to pay the electric bill, I quietly sent the payment myself. It was easier than watching her look flustered and apologetic. One afternoon, after I handed her an envelope for the tuition payment, Peyton hugged me and whispered, "You remind me so much of my mother. She was the only person who ever cared this way." Her words melted me. I smiled through the lump in my throat, thinking maybe this was what family was meant to be, giving without keeping count. But something shifted over time. The requests grew more frequent and always came wrapped in affection. "You're the only one I can count on," she'd say. "I don't know what we'd do without you." It sounded tender, but I began to notice that gratitude never lasted long, only until the next favor was needed. When I once hesitated, saying I'd already helped with the month's expenses, Peyton suddenly became pale, pressing a hand to her temple. "I think my blood pressure's acting up again," she murmured weakly. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, guilt gnawing at me. I kept asking myself whether I was heartless or just tired. Helping them used to make me feel needed. Now it made me feel small, like my worth depended on how much I could give. The sweetness that once warmed me had turned heavy, sticky, trapping me in a web of obligations spun with love and manipulation. I didn't want to believe it, but I could feel it, the quiet shift from kindness to control. Peyton knew exactly how to play her role, and she played it beautifully. In public, she was the perfect daughter-in-law. Soft-spoken, graceful, always addressing me with tender warmth. "Mom," she would say, her voice lilting with affection, as she helped me out of the car or poured me tea. Her eyes would glisten with sincerity, her smile patient and sweet. The neighbors adored her. "Your daughter-in-law is an angel," Daisy Mrs. Carter once said during a block party. "So respectful, so attentive. You're lucky." And I foolishly believed it. At the women's club meetings, I often heard from others how Peyton spoke of me. "My mother-in-law is a retired doctor," she'd say proudly. "She's taught me so much about health and compassion." Every time someone repeated those words to me, my heart swelled. It felt good to be seen through her eyes, to be appreciated. I used to think, perhaps naively, that I'd been blessed with something many women never had: a daughter-in-law who treated me like her own mother. But behind closed doors, the warmth faded like stage lights after a show. When we were alone, Peyton's voice changed, short-clipped, efficient. She never met my eyes for long. Conversations turned one-sided. I spoke. She nodded, her attention already elsewhere. Sometimes she'd scroll through her phone while I was talking. If I tried to touch her arm or ask about her day, she'd flinch slightly, as though my presence were an inconvenience she was too polite to mention. It wasn't cruelty, at least not the obvious kind. It was colder, quieter, hidden behind a veneer of civility that left no marks but drained the air of warmth. Once, after a neighborhood dinner, she thanked me in front of everyone for always treating me like your own daughter. But the moment the guests left, her tone turned flat. "You didn't have to hover around me all night, Mom." It looked forced. I stood there smiling faintly, unable to decide whether she was teasing or cutting deep. That night, as I washed the dishes alone, the compliments from the neighbors echoed in my mind, now hollow and heavy. Maybe it wasn't me she respected, it was the image of me that made her look good. For the first time, I wondered if her affection was ever real, or if it was just another layer of the performance she gave so effortlessly. After Caleb was born, little things began to change in ways I couldn't quite name. Peyton, who used to sing joyfully in the church choir every Sunday, suddenly stopped attending service. She had once been the heart of the children's Bible class, the woman who taught verses with songs and laughter, her voice bright and warm. But now, every Sunday morning, while church bells rang through Charleston, she would dress neatly, fix her hair, spray her perfume, and tell me softly, "I'm visiting my father today, Mom. He needs me more than ever." At first, I admired her devotion. Not many women would take care of both a newborn and an aging parent with such grace. When I offered to join her one weekend, thinking perhaps we could visit the nursing home together, she quickly declined. "He doesn't like meeting strangers," she said gently, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Even family he doesn't see often makes him anxious." Her tone was calm, convincing, but her eyes didn't meet mine. It was strange. Before Caleb, she loved having me accompany her anywhere, to the market, to church, to Emma's school recitals. After his birth, she began keeping her Sundays to herself. Each time she left, she looked perfectly composed, almost radiant, like someone heading to a celebration rather than a hospital room. I tried to dismiss the thought as unkind suspicion. She was probably just trying to stay strong for her father. Still, a small unease started to form, that quiet, cold instinct mothers know too well. Austin, meanwhile, was always at the hospital, drowning in his own patients. When I mentioned my worry to him, he brushed it off with a tired smile. "Mom, Peyton's doing her best. If she can take care of the kids and visit her dad, I'm grateful. Don't overthink it." His words were meant to reassure me, but instead, they left me more alone with my doubts. One Sunday, as I stood by the window watching her car disappear down the street, I noticed something unsettling. She didn't turn toward the nursing home's direction. Her route curved the other way toward the Harbor Road. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself. But deep down, something about the way she drove off, too quickly, too purposefully, left a knot tightening in my chest. One afternoon, I stopped by their house with a basket of homemade soup and some fresh bread. It was nothing unusual. I often brought meals when Austin was working late, and Peyton seemed overwhelmed. The door was unlocked, and I heard movement in the kitchen. When I called her name, there was a brief pause before she answered, her voice a little too bright, coming Mom. As I stepped in, I saw her at the counter hurriedly sealing a thick envelope. The label on it was written in neat, feminine handwriting, Nursing Home Fund, for Dad. The words made me smile at first. She was such a devoted daughter, I thought, until something about the scene caught me off guard. The stack of bills was large, far too much for a simple monthly fee. Trying to sound casual, I asked, "Which nursing home is your father staying at these days? Maybe I could stop by to bring some fruit or flowers." Peyton's smile tightened. "Oh, it's in Greenville," she said quickly. "A bit far, Mom. The drive would tire you out. Really, there's no need." Her tone was polite, but sharp enough to end the conversation. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way she slipped the envelope into her purse before changing the subject. We sat down for tea, and though she talked about the children and Austin's schedule, her words floated past me. My mind stayed with that envelope. Something didn't feel right. That evening, I tried calling the number she'd once given me for the nursing home. The line rang twice before an automated voice said, "This number is not in service." I tried again. Same result. I looked at the sticky note on which she'd written the contact months ago, perfect, neat handwriting, yet now it felt like part of a performance. Over the next few days, more inconsistencies began to appear, small but impossible to ignore. Peyton mentioned her father's nurse was named Sandra, but when I asked what hospital she worked for, she couldn't recall. She said his health had worsened, yet she never looked tired or worried. Instead, she seemed almost glowing. That night, as I sat in my quiet living room, I couldn't shake the thought. I had spent my entire life believing that kindness would always return to me in kind. But now, that belief felt fragile, almost foolish. I stared at the dark window, my reflection faint against the glass, and whispered to myself, "Something is being hidden, and I may soon pay the price for my own trust." That Sunday morning, I told Austin I was meeting an old friend for brunch. I even dressed the part, light sweater, pearl earrings, a calm smile, so no one would suspect. But my heart was pounding like a guilty drum as I sat in my car, parked 3 blocks away from their house. The air was still heavy with the scent of magnolia, and I could almost hear the seconds ticking by on my wristwatch. At 10:15, the front door opened. Peyton stepped out, and my breath caught. She didn't look like a woman heading to a nursing home. Her dress was short, clinging to her body, the neckline far too daring for Sunday morning. Her heels clicked sharply against the driveway, her perfume strong enough to linger even after she locked the door. Her hair was curled perfectly, makeup flawless, red lipstick, smoky eyes, every detail deliberate. I watched her adjust her reflection in the car mirror, then smile, just a small, secret smile that chilled me. I followed from a distance, careful to keep 2 cars between us. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The doctor in me resurfaced, the one trained to observe, to notice the smallest irregularity. Every turn she took, every stoplight, every glance in her rearview mirror, I memorized it all. My pulse thudded like it used to before surgery, that mix of fear and focus. But when she turned right, I realized she wasn't heading toward the nursing home in Mount Pleasant. She was going west, toward North Charleston. My stomach tightened. That area wasn't known for hospitals, it was known for pawn shops, run-down motels, and bars that never closed. The road narrowed the houses, older, their paint peeling, under the southern heat. I wanted to stop to turn around, but something in me refused. I had to know. Peyton parked outside a small building with faded blue walls and a flickering sign that read, Harbor View Lounge. A man stood by the door smoking, and when she stepped out, he waved. She smiled again, the same smile she used to greet me when asking for help. My chest felt hollow. I pulled over half a block away and sat there frozen, watching her disappear inside. The truth was beginning to form, dark and shapeless, but undeniable. My instincts had been right all along. I whispered to myself, barely breathing, "Dear God, what have I done by trusting her?" I parked far enough away to stay unseen, but close enough to witness everything. My pulse thudded in my ears as I watched Peyton's car pull up to a weathered building with peeling paint and crooked metal bars on the windows. The sign above the door read, "Riverbend Apartments." The letters faded and cracked. My breath hitched. This was no nursing home. There were no ramps, no visiting hours posted, no staff in uniform, only a rusted row of mailboxes stuffed with advertisements and the faint stench of spilled alcohol drifting through the air. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles whitened. My eyes followed Peyton as she stepped out of her car. Her heels clicked against the cracked concrete, echoing in the empty lot. She hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder, then walked briskly toward the entrance. My instinct screamed, "Turn away, Daisy," but my body didn't move. I had to see. I had to know, too. From where I sat, I could see the hallway through the glass door. The lights inside flickered weakly, casting a yellow haze over the stained walls. Then, as she reached the second door on the left, 3B, a man appeared. He was middle-aged, maybe in his late 40s, with graying hair and a belly that strained against his shirt. In one hand, he held a bottle of whiskey. His eyes lit up when he saw her. Before I could blink, Peyton stepped into his arms. They kissed deeply, urgently, like two people who hadn't seen each other in far too long. His hands were on her waist, pulling her close, her laughter muffled against his neck. I felt the sound rather than heard it, a faint echo carried across the parking lot. Then, without hesitation, they disappeared inside, and the door closed behind them. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and I wasn't sure if it was from the sunlight or the tears stinging my eyes. My mind refused to believe what it had seen. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the wild rhythm beneath my ribs. My fingers trembled uncontrollably on the steering wheel. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Not a coincidence, not some errand gone wrong. The truth had just revealed itself, cruel and undeniable. The woman I had trusted, defended, even loved like a daughter, was living a lie, and I had just witnessed it with my own eyes. For a moment, panic took control. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and I nearly pressed the gas, ready to drive away from that horrible scene as fast as I could. But then, instinct discipline pulled me back. Years in medicine had taught me one rule when you face a crisis: breathe. First observe, second act, last. So I froze, forced myself to inhale slowly, and began to notice things. The man's car was still parked outside the apartment. A gray sedan, older model, the kind you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, and memorized the plate number. My pulse still thundered, but my mind began to clear. I wrote it down in my notebook, along with the address, Riverbend Apartments, Unit 3B, corner of King Street and Dorchester Road. Time, 10:47 a.m. Behavior. Peyton entered willingly, physical contact confirmed. I caught myself noting each detail like I was documenting a patient's symptoms. By the time I pulled away, my body trembled, but my mind was steady. I drove home in silence, the hum of the tires sounding like a distant heartbeat. When I reached my driveway, I didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to the drawer in my study where I kept family documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, old photographs. My fingers hesitated, before opening the folder marked Walsh family. Inside, I found what I was looking for: Peyton's birth certificate. My eyes skimmed the page until they stopped on one line, Father Charles Quinn. There was no notation about biological or step, just a name, simple and ambiguous. My throat tightened. The man at Riverbend looked like he could be in his late 40s, old enough to be her father. But the way she kissed him, no, that wasn't fatherly affection. So I took out a new notebook, labeled it Case Peyton Walsh, and began to write. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Peyton in that man's arms, her laughter muffled against his neck. The image looped endlessly, poisoning every quiet corner of my mind. By dawn, I sat at my desk with a cup of cold coffee, staring at my laptop. If I had learned anything in medicine, it was that diagnosis required evidence, not emotion. I needed to know who that man really was. I started with what little I knew his name on the birth certificate: Charles Quinn. My fingers trembled as I typed it into Facebook, searching through groups and old connections. Peyton had once mentioned growing up near Greenville, so I narrowed it to that area. After nearly an hour of scrolling, I found a post from an older woman who looked familiar, someone who'd commented on Peyton's wedding photos years ago. Her name was Nancy Foster. I sent her a message. "Hello, Mrs. Foster. I'm Daisy Peyton's mother-in-law. May I ask, was Charles Quinn her father?" The reply came quickly, almost too quickly. "Father, oh, honey, he wasn't her real father. He married Peyton's mom when she was little. A mean man, that one." People around here tried to warn her mother. I stared at the screen, my pulse slowing to an icy crawl. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. Stepfather. That one word changed everything. The pieces began to fit together: the secrecy, the evasive answers, the way Peyton's face would harden whenever family was mentioned. But I needed proof, not gossip. I opened the South Carolina Public Records database, hands steady now. Years of clinical work had taught me patience, the ability to search methodically, line by line. When I finally found it, my stomach turned. Charles Quinn, charged with domestic violence and sexual harassment, 2009. The case had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence, but the report described patterns of coercion and manipulation. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just a secret affair. It was something darker. Something that had been festering for years, hidden behind Sunday smiles and family dinners. I realized then that I couldn't handle this alone. That afternoon, I made a call I never thought I'd make again. "Spencer Reed," I said when the familiar voice answered. "It's Daisy Mitchell. I need your help with something." Discreet. Spencer had once been my late husband's legal partner, a quiet, meticulous man I trusted like family. He didn't ask for details, just replied softly, "Tell me when and where." For the first time in days, I exhaled. The storm was coming, but I finally had someone on my side. Spencer Reed arrived at my house just after noon, his usual quiet presence filling the room with a calm I desperately needed. At 45, he carried the air of someone who had seen too much but learned to show little. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a civil investigator, the kind who knew how to peel back truth without leaving fingerprints. Years ago, he'd defended me in a malpractice case when I was still a practicing physician. I remembered his sharp eyes, his steady tone, and the way he handled chaos as if it were a chessboard. That same steadiness was what brought me peace now. We sat in the kitchen, the afternoon light spilling over the table. I laid out every detail: the trips to the so-called nursing home, the envelopes of cash, the name Charles Quinn, the apartment, the kiss. My voice trembled at first, but as I went on, the tremor gave way to precision. "If I'm wrong," I said, my throat tight, "I'll apologize and live with that shame. But if I'm right, my son deserves to know who he's living with, who he's protecting." Spencer listened without interrupting, his hands folded neatly, eyes focused but unreadable. When I finished, he took a slow breath and leaned back slightly. "You did the right thing coming to me," he said. "But you can't confront her, not yet. If you do, she'll cover her tracks, and everything you've seen will disappear like smoke." I nodded, though the thought of waiting made my stomach twist. "So what do we do?" "We build a case," he replied simply. "I'll confirm his identity and their connection through legal channels. Financial records, property leases, background checks. All clean, all lawful. We don't accuse, we prove. Once we have facts, we decide what comes next." His calm certainty steadied me. For the first time since that morning at Riverbend Apartments, I felt something close to control. "Spencer," I said quietly, "this could destroy my family." He met my gaze, his voice gentle but firm. "Or it could save it, Daisy. The truth always has a cost. We just have to make sure it's the right person who pays." As he left, the weight of his words lingered in the air. I knew then this was no longer a personal suspicion. It was an investigation, and once started, there would be no turning back. 2 weeks later, Spencer returned with a folder so thick it made a sound when he placed it on my kitchen table. The air between us felt heavier than usual, charged with something unsaid. He didn't waste time on preamble, just looked at me with that careful calm of his and said quietly, "You need to brace yourself, Daisy." He opened the file, sliding the first page toward me. The name at the top sent a chill through me. Charles Quinn, age 58, unemployed. Beneath it, a list of charges and notations that made my stomach turn. Spencer read as I skimmed. Arrested in 2008 for domestic violence and child molestation involving a minor under 16. Case dismissed when the victim's mother withdrew her complaint. My throat went dry. "Who filed it?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Spencer's eyes flicked to the next document. "Helen Quinn, Peyton's mother." The words sat between us like poison. Spencer continued, his voice steady but heavy. "Helen withdrew the charges 6 months later. Official reason, personal circumstances. A year after that, she was found dead, carbon monoxide poisoning. It was ruled an accident, but the police report includes a line that caught my attention." He turned the page and pointed to a note in faded ink. "Investigators do not rule out the possibility of human interference." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You mean he could have killed her?" My voice barely broke above a whisper. Spencer didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, fingers, steepled eyes steady on mine. "We can't assume anything yet. But Daisy, if Peyton moved back in with him after her mother's death, that's not just poor judgment. That's dangerous, possibly criminal. If there was coercion, manipulation, or abuse that continued into adulthood, it crosses the line." The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in. I tried to speak but couldn't. Every image of Peyton, smiling, every word she'd spoken about family, now twisted into something grotesque. "She's been lying to everyone," I finally said. "To my son, to those children." Spencer nodded slowly. "And if this connection is confirmed, we'll need to move carefully. There's a child welfare angle, financial implications, maybe even fraud. This isn't just a family issue anymore, it's a legal one." I pressed my hands together to stop them from shaking. "What do we do now?" He looked at me gravely. "We keep digging. Quietly. Until there's no doubt left." Spencer arrived early that morning, carrying his leather briefcase and that same quiet precision that always made me feel both safe and uneasy. We sat in the study blinds, half closed, the hum of the ceiling fan, the only sound between us. When he opened his folder, I noticed the bank's logo printed in blue on the top of each page. He didn't say anything at first, just slid the first statement toward me. "You still have joint authorization on Austin's account, correct?" he asked. I nodded. "Years ago, when Austin was in medical school, I'd co-signed to help manage tuition payments. I never thought that small detail would one day uncover something like this. Here, Spencer said, tapping the page. Every month on the 5th, there's a transfer of $4,500 from the joint marital account to a personal account under the name C. Quinn. He paused, letting the weight of the name sink in. I stared at it, those letters so simple and yet so damning. My throat went dry. And the memo line, I whispered. He turned the page. Nursing home care. Same note every month, same amount. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had seen that phrase before, heard it on Peyton's lips, each time she said she was visiting her father. It had sounded so ordinary, so kind. But Spencer's next words shattered that illusion. I ran a check on the receiving account. It's used to pay rent for an apartment at Riverbend liquor purchases and a series of luxury items, watches, cologne, electronics, all tied to Charles Quinn. I felt a chill spread from my spine outward. My hands trembled as I stared at the evidence, black and white, irrefutable. She's been paying for him, I said softly. With Austin's money. With my grandchildren's future. Spencer leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. Daisy, this is embezzlement if proven, but we can't confront her yet. The moment she senses suspicion, she'll erase the trail. If you want to protect your son and those children, we need to do this right. Legally. Quietly. I nodded slowly, though anger surged under my skin. Every time Peyton had thanked me for helping with the bills, every time she'd smiled and called me Mom, she'd been funding the man who'd destroyed her mother and perhaps herself. I pressed my palms against the desk to steady myself. Do what you need to, Spencer, I said finally, my voice low but steady. I won't let her take another thing from this family. That Sunday, the house smelled like comfort and memory-baked apples, warm butter and lavender tea steeping quietly on the table. I had arranged everything just as I used to, the porcelain teapot, the embroidered napkins, the apple pie, cooling on its silver rack. It looked like an ordinary Sunday, but my heartbeat told a different story. Today wasn't about tea or kindness. It was about truth. When Peyton arrived, she seemed surprised by the invitation, but not suspicious. She smiled, though her eyes looked tired, shadowed. This smells amazing, Mom, she said softly, taking her usual seat across from me. For a while, we talked about the children, Emma's new school project, Caleb's fascination with dinosaurs. Her laughter sounded almost genuine, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot why we were there. Then as the conversation slowed, I set my teacup down and looked at her carefully. Peyton. I began gently. You know I've always cared for you. That's why I need to say this quietly before it's too late. She looked up, smiling uncertainly. I took a breath. I know the man at Riverbend isn't your father. And I know what's been happening between you two. The color drained from her face. Her teacup rattled against the saucer. I don't know what you mean, she stammered. You do, I said softly, though my voice trembled. You should stop, Peyton, because I might forgive you, but the law won't. She cried harder, then pressing her hands to her face. The air between us thickened with the weight of guilt and relief. I sat there quietly watching her crumble, not with hatred, but with something closer to sorrow. In that moment, I wasn't a mother-in-law or an investigator. I was a doctor again, trying to save a soul that had forgotten how to heal. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Peyton. The words were soft, contrite, and carefully chosen. Thank you for giving me a second chance, Mom. I promise I'll never see Charles again. I want to start over. I don't want to lose you. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, and for the first time in weeks, my chest loosened. The image of her tearful face from yesterday lingered in my mind, the trembling hands, the cracked voice, the raw confession. Maybe I thought kindness really could heal what punishment could not. When Spencer called that afternoon, I told him about the message, my tone, lighter than it had been in days. Maybe she's come to her senses, I said. Maybe she really wants to change. There was a long pause on the other end before he spoke. Daisy, he said slowly, people don't change overnight, especially when they've built their lives on lies. Desperation makes them act not out of guilt, but out of fear. Don't mistake tears for transformation. Guilt doesn't dissolve, it reacts. His words settled in my mind like cold stones, but I wanted to believe otherwise. I wanted to believe that all the pain and shame I had seen in her eyes were real. So I told myself Spencer was just being cautious, as lawyers often are. I brewed tea, straightened the dining room, and tried to feel normal again. That night after Austin took the kids to bed, I sat in the living room, the house unusually still. Out of habit, I checked the nanny cam system. I often used it to keep an eye on the children when they stayed over. The monitor blinked to life, showing the kitchen in grainy black and white. At first, I thought the noise I heard was the hum of the refrigerator. Then I recognized the voice. Peyton's. She was on the phone, whispering urgently, her tone sharp and frightened. She knows, she said, pacing near the sink. She found out everything. We have to do something before it all falls apart. The blood drained from my face. My hand froze on the remote as her words crackled through the static. I could hear the panic in her voice, the same voice that had called me Mom just hours earlier. My stomach twisted. Spencer had been right. This wasn't repentance, it was strategy. The tears, the promises, the gentle apology, all part of a performance meant to buy time. And now time was running out. Spencer came over the next morning, his face set, in that grim, analytical calm I had learned to trust. I showed him the recorded audio from the nanny cam Peyton's, whisper the panic in her voice, that single chilling sentence, "We have to do something before it all falls apart." When it ended, silence filled the room. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Spencer finally exhaled and said quietly, "Daisy, from this moment on, you say nothing. Pretend you know nothing. Let her think she's in control. It's the only way we'll catch her." The air in the kitchen felt colder. I nodded slowly, though my insides were trembling. "So she knows I'm on to her," I whispered. "She suspects," he corrected, "and that makes her dangerous. People like Peyton, when they feel cornered, don't confess, they react. You need to act as if nothing's changed. Keep your routine, keep smiling, and let me handle the rest." I wanted to protest, to tell him I couldn't live with someone planning God knows what. But I also knew he was right. In medicine, panic kills, and so does acting too soon. I steadied my breath. Fear would not control me. Later that day, Spencer called again. His voice was low but urgent. "I dug deeper into Charles Quinn," he said. "He recently tried purchasing high-dose sleeping pills and arsenic from an online vendor, both under a fake name, Caleb Reed. The transactions were flagged, but not followed up by authorities. I've already pulled the digital records." I gripped the phone tighter. "Arsenic. You mean—" "Yes," Spencer interrupted. "Poison. It's old-fashioned, but it leaves little trace in the right dose." My mouth went dry. For a few seconds, I couldn't form words. Everything suddenly made sense, the urgency in Peyton's voice, the false tears, the sudden attempts at reconciliation. They weren't trying to mend anything, they were buying time. Spencer's tone softened, but his words struck deep. "Daisy, this isn't about hiding an affair anymore. They're preparing to silence you, permanently." I looked around my quiet house, the floral curtains, the photos of my grandchildren, the teapot still sitting where Peyton had placed it days ago, and a cold realization gripped me. I was living inside their next move, but something inside me shifted. Then, not fear, but resolve. I had spent my life saving lives in operating rooms, fighting chaos with precision. Now that same discipline would save my own. I whispered into the phone, steady and deliberate. "Then let them play their game, Spencer. This time I'll be ready." That evening, Peyton arrived with a warm smile and a casserole dish wrapped neatly in foil. "You've lost weight, Mom," she said sweetly, setting it on the counter. "You need to eat something hearty. I made your favorite chicken pot pie." Her tone was soft, almost affectionate, and for a moment I wanted to believe it was genuine. After all, pretending was easier than doubting every gesture. We ate together just like old times. She talked about the kids, about Austin's night shift, about how lonely she felt handling things alone. I nodded, smiled, tried to appear calm. But an hour after she left, my chest began to tighten. My pulse quickened. My stomach twisted violently as if someone had lit a fire inside me. I leaned against the counter, gasping for air, fighting the nausea rising up my throat. The symptoms were too familiar: racing heart, dizziness, stomach cramps. As a doctor, I'd seen these signs before. It was a mild form of poisoning. Once the pain subsided, I sat at the table with trembling hands and began to write. Time 8:42 p.m. Dish, chicken pot, pie. Symptoms: tachycardia, abdominal cramps, dizziness. Duration approximately 45 minutes. I logged every detail like I used to record patient charts, calmly, methodically, without emotion. The next day, Peyton dropped by again, this time with soup. "Made fresh this morning," she said. I thanked her, forcing a smile. That evening, I took only 3 spoonfuls. Within half an hour, the same burning sensation returned. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I closed my eyes, breathing through it, waiting for it to pass. When it finally did, I noted the details again. Time, symptoms, duration precise and clear. By the 3rd day, I was certain. Each time I ate what Peyton brought, the symptoms came back. And when I ate anything else, plain toast, tea, leftovers, I'd cooked myself, I felt perfectly fine. My body wasn't betraying me. It was warning me. I didn't tell Austin. I couldn't. His loyalty to Peyton ran too deep, and without proof, my words would sound like paranoia. So instead, I acted like nothing had changed. I thanked Peyton, complimented her cooking, and smiled when she left the next dish on my counter. Then when she was gone, I sealed each portion carefully in labeled containers, date time, meal type, and placed them in the back of the refrigerator. When the time came, I would send them for testing. For now, I would play her game, but under my own rules. 3 days later, the results came back. I had sent the food samples quietly to a private toxicology lab in Charleston, to an old friend named Marianne Collins, a forensic specialist I'd known since my hospital days. I trusted her completely. She called that morning, her voice calm, but waited. "Daisy," she said, "I've got your results, and you might want to sit down." I was already sitting. "Tell me," I said. "There are traces of lorazepam in all 3 samples, mild sedative levels. That alone could make you dizzy, disoriented, or sleepy." She hesitated before continuing. "But that's not the worst part. Each sample also contains measurable amounts of arsenic. Small doses, barely detectable, but enough to build up over time. If ingested regularly, it could lead to liver failure, cardiac arrhythmia, even death, and it would look natural." For a few seconds, all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator beside me. I stared at the wall, my breath steady but shallow. "Are you absolutely sure, Marianne?" She sighed softly. I double-checked the results. "Daisy, this isn't accidental contamination. Someone added those substances deliberately. But before you accuse anyone, you need to be certain no one else handled your food. Maybe a mix-up. Someone on medication." Her question hung in the air, kind but cautious, the voice of a scientist trying to stay objective. I straightened my back, my voice turning colder than I intended. "No, Marianne, there's no confusion. I don't take lorazepam. No one in my house does. I'm not mistaken." I paused, letting the words harden. I used to save patients who were poisoned, and now I'm one of them. There was silence on the line. I imagined her pressing her lips together, unsure what to say. Finally, she spoke softly. Daisy, whoever's doing this knows what they're doing. You need to protect yourself. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. My hands no longer shook. My fear had burned itself out, leaving only clarity, sharp, cold, and deliberate. I looked at the neatly labeled containers still in my fridge, the empty plates Peyton had left, the faint smell of lavender that lingered in the kitchen air. Pity had no place here anymore. Whatever guilt or sympathy I'd once felt for Peyton vanished. This wasn't about saving her soul. This was about survival. When I walked into Spencer Reed's office that morning, the air smelled faintly of coffee, and printer ink, the scent of strategy. I placed the sealed folder on his desk, the toxicology results still fresh in my mind, like a wound that hadn't scabbed. Spencer opened it, scanned the pages, and when he looked up, his expression had hardened. Lorazepam and arsenic, he said quietly. They weren't trying to scare you, Daisy. They were trying to finish you. I met his gaze, steady but cold. If I go to the police now, they'll deny everything. No fingerprints, no witnesses. I need something undeniable, something that speaks louder than tears or lies. Spencer leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. Then we build the kind of evidence no one can erase, he said. We don't just prove the poisoning, we prove intent. That's what turns a family tragedy into a criminal case. His words carried the weight of precision. I could see the investigator in him coming alive. He outlined a plan, clear and methodical. First, we document everything properly. No illegal recordings, no guesswork. I'll file a legal notice that you're monitoring your home for safety. It keeps all your recordings admissible in court. Then we'll set up surveillance discreetly. We spent the afternoon preparing. Spencer unpacked 2 small devices from a black case, a wall plug that doubled as a hidden camera, and a kitchen clock equipped with an audio recorder. These are motion activated, he explained. They'll start the moment someone walks in or speaks louder than a whisper. He showed me how to arm and disarm the system, how to check the recordings without leaving a trace. I followed every step. Carefully, my hands steady, my mind sharper than it had been in years. I wasn't just a retired doctor anymore. I was a witness, learning how to fight back. That night, I installed the camera in the hallway socket and hung the clock in the kitchen, where Peyton often cooked or helped clean up. My movements were deliberate, almost surgical. Every wire tucked neatly, every angle tested twice. Spencer watched me with quiet approval. "You're good at this," he said. I gave a faint smile. "Observation used to save lives in my job. Now it's going to save mine." For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. That night, I sat with Spencer in the dim study while he played the audio file we had been waiting for, and the house felt suddenly too small for the secret it now held. I had listened to voices before in courtrooms and hospital rooms, but never ones that sounded so ordinary while planning something so monstrous. Peyton's voice came through low and urgent, saying that the sedatives were working and that I was becoming weaker, that in a few weeks the house would be theirs. She sounded relieved and almost eager. Then Charles replied with a brittle laugh and instructions about forging a will, telling her where the old template was kept in the wardrobe and reminding her to match my handwriting style to avoid suspicion. Peyton answered, in a voice that sounded like staged grief, saying she would tell everyone I had died of a heart attack, that the police would accept the story, and that no one would think to look deeper at the death of an elderly woman who seemed frail. As I listened, the room closed in around me. The recorded words were not accusations or hazy implications, they were plans. They talked about timing and about how to make the cause of death look natural. They spoke about misdirecting neighbors and about altering certain paperwork so that my name would be on the documents they wanted. And Charles mentioned the specific vendor where he had tried to buy arsenic and high-dose sedatives under a false name. Spencer rewound and replayed the segment where Peyton laughed softly while saying that the pills would make me sleepy and compliant, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. It was as if the kindness I had mistaken for care had been a costume worn to hide cold calculation. Spencer did not flinch. He saved the file to 3 different encrypted drives and noted the timestamps and metadata while I sat very still. He also showed me the bank records and the medication invoices he had already pulled, and there on the screen was Peyton's card information, linked to purchases of sedatives, and a flagged transaction for a chemical supply company. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It read like a map of intent. He explained that together these items formed the core of a charge that could be brought against both of them, and that the audio was the most devastating piece because it showed conscious planning and coordination rather than accidental harm. I felt cold and furious at once. The fear was there too, an animal ache under the ribs, but it was not the kind of fear that paralyzes. It was the kind that sharpens the senses and orders the next steps. Spencer told me we would turn this recording into formal exhibits, that he would secure the originals and prepare sworn statements about chain of custody, and that we would file for protective orders and begin a criminal referral. I listened and repeated each instruction back to him like a doctor reciting a protocol. Then I asked him to make sure the kids would never see their mother under whatever pretense she might try to keep, and he agreed without hesitation. I went to bed that night, knowing that the people I had loved had been planning my end, and that they had done it with a normal voice and a plan that smelled of paperwork and poison. I also knew I was not a victim in the way they assumed, and that the next move would be deliberate and unyielding. That evening, the trap closed itself without me lifting a finger. Austin and Peyton came by unannounced, bringing wine and the children as if it were just another family visit. The air felt heavy, polite smiles, covering a tension neither of us could name aloud. I poured tea, listened to Peyton talk about Emma's piano lessons, and waited. It happened halfway through the conversation, a soft sound, the flutter of paper, hitting the floor. Austin bent to pick it up, but I was faster. A single sheet lay at my feet, thick paper with an embossed heading that froze my blood last will and testament of Daisy Mitchell. My name. My supposed signature space blank, but the rest of the text filled neatly dividing assets, listing property and naming beneficiaries. The formatting looked professional. Too professional. Peyton's face drained of color. "Oh, that's just something for the estate lawyer," she stammered. "A sample template I found online." Her voice trembled, her hands fidgeting, eyes darting to Austin for help. I looked at her for a long, still moment, then folded the paper carefully, placed it on the table, and said quietly, "Thank you for bringing this, dear. It's always good to be prepared." She didn't catch the tone, but Spencer would. I had texted him earlier that day, asking him to stay alert. When he arrived 15 minutes later, pretending to deliver a briefcase I had forgotten at his office, his eyes caught the document immediately. Calmly, he picked it up with a tissue, slid it into a folder, and excused himself to check a legal clause. Peyton said nothing. Austin looked confused, but assumed it was normal lawyer talk. By the next morning, Spencer had taken the document to a certified notary and handwriting expert in Charleston. The report came in less than 12 hours later. Though the imitation was precise pressure angle, even ink color, the expert found 3 microscopic inconsistencies in the curvature of letters and the spacing between strokes. It was enough to confirm one thing: the signature was forged. Under South Carolina law, that was a felony forgery of testamentary documents. When Spencer handed me the official verification, I felt neither victory nor rage, only a strange, clinical calm. I asked him to stay while I called Austin over. Peyton sat across from me, pale and trembling. I held up the notarized report, the forged will beneath it. "Con A," I said softly. There are some illnesses that only justice can cure. Austin's eyes widened as he read realization dawning like a slow burn. Peyton broke down in sobs, pleading, but it was too late. The diagnosis was final, and this time the cure would not come from medicine, but from the law. The courthouse in downtown Charleston was already surrounded by reporters when I arrived that morning. The autumn wind carried the rustle of oak leaves across the steps, mingling with the low hum of conversation and camera shutters. Inside, the air felt heavier, charged with something more than tension. It was the weight of justice about to unfold. I walked beside Spencer Reed, his expression calm but alert. A quiet anchor in a storm of whispers. I wore a simple gray coat, my hair neatly tied, the silver brooch on my lapel glinting faintly in the light. Every step I took echoed like a quiet declaration dignity would be my armor today. The courtroom was crowded. Neighbors, journalists, and faces I barely recognized from church or the grocery store. Everyone seemed to hold their breath as the bailiff called the case, State of South Carolina versus Peyton Walsh and Charles Quinn, charges of attempted murder of an elderly person and forgery of testamentary documents. The words hung in the air like the sound of a gavel before it fell. Peyton sat at the defense table, her skin pale, her eyes downcast. The same hands that once served me tea now gripped the sleeve of her attorney's suit so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Behind her, Charles Quinn lounged in his seat, his eyes bloodshot, his posture careless. The faint smell of alcohol seemed to follow him like a shadow. When the judge entered the room, rose in silence. I caught sight of Austin sitting in the back row, torn between disbelief and pain, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Some truths needed witnesses, even the ones that hurt. The prosecutor, a woman named Karen Mills, stepped forward to open the case. Her voice was steady, deliberate, filled with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too many human betrayals. "Your Honor," she began, "this is not merely a case of family conflict or financial dispute. This is a story of greed of two people who chose to destroy what they once called love to claim what was never theirs." She paused, turning toward Peyton and Charles. "The evidence will show deliberate poisoning, calculated forgery, and an intent not only to steal wealth, but to erase the very life that stood in their way." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Cameras clicked. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my heartbeat steady. For the first time, it wasn't fear that filled me, it was clarity. When the prosecutor nodded toward me, I lifted my chin slightly. I had already survived their poison, their lies, their betrayal. Now I would survive their judgment too. When the second day of trial began, the courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the projector. Spencer Reed stood before the judge, his calm voice steady, his expression controlled but sharp. "Your Honor," he began, "the defense may deny intent, but the evidence speaks for itself." He clicked a remote, and the first image filled the screen, a grainy but unmistakable video recorded in Daisy Mitchell's kitchen. The footage showed Peyton in her neat cardigan and polished smile, ladling soup into a bowl. She glanced around, then reached into her purse and pulled out 2 small vials. The camera caught the slow, careful motion as she poured the contents into the pot. A few drops of lorazepam, a pinch of arsenic powder, then stirred calmly, humming to herself. The room gasped as her voice played over the speakers, clear and cold. "When she feels weak, I'll call the doctor, but not too soon." The prosecutor turned to the jury. "This," she said, "is not care, it's calculation." Spencer pressed play again. The next recording was audio only captured from the clock in the kitchen. Peyton's voice trembled faintly as she spoke on the phone. "Charles, I think she suspects something." His response came low and slurred. "Don't panic. Wait for the right day when she's alone. Once she's gone, I'll handle the paperwork. The will look legal enough." The words hung in the courtroom like smoke, ugly, undeniable. Peyton covered her face, tears streaming, but the jury's eyes were fixed on the screen. Then came the paper evidence. Spencer approached the bench with printed bank statements, each marked and highlighted. $12,000, he said, transferred monthly from the joint marital account of Austin Walsh and Peyton Walsh to the personal account of Charles Quinn. He held up the documents, the dates lined up perfectly with the recorded phone calls. Motive and means, Your Honor. Consistent and deliberate. Finally, the forensic report was read aloud. The toxicology lab had confirmed it. The compounds found in the soup samples and the traces recovered from Daisy's kitchen sink matched exactly with the arsenic and lorazepam detected in Peyton's possession. The chain of evidence was complete, airtight. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the defense attorney had no words left. The truth stood naked under the courtroom lights, undeniable and unmerciful. I sat still, my hands folded, my heartbeat calm. Spencer caught my eye from across the room, a silent nod, not of triumph, but of justice fulfilled. When the prosecutor finished presenting the evidence, the room was so still that I could hear the faint ticking of the clock above the judge's bench. Peyton sat frozen, her shoulders trembling. Then suddenly she broke. A choked sob escaped her lips as she fell to her knees in the middle of the courtroom. "Please," she cried, her voice cracking through the silence. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted to scare her to make her stop controlling my life." Her tears streaked down her face, smudging the careful makeup she had worn like armor. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together, looking toward the judge, toward me, toward anyone who might still see her as human. The prosecutor, Karen Mills, didn't even blink. "You wanted to scare her," she said evenly. By lacing her food with arsenic, she took a step closer, her tone cutting but measured. By forging her signature on a legal will recognized by the state of South Carolina. "That's your definition of fear, Mrs. Walsh." The defense attorney tried to object, but the judge waved him off. The truth didn't need interruption. Karen pressed on, holding the document high. "Tell the court, Mrs. Walsh, who stood to gain when Dr. Daisy Mitchell died, who would inherit the house, the investments, the life insurance." Peyton's lips quivered. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I don't know." "You don't know." Karen's voice sharpened. "Then perhaps this will remind you." She nodded toward the clerk, who brought up the projected bank statements. The highlighted transfers glowed on the screen, month after month of money funneled into Charles Quinn's account. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The sound of pens dropping chairs, creaking tiny noises that seemed deafening in the silence that followed. Austin, sitting just a few feet behind Peyton, covered his face with both hands. "Oh, God," he whispered, voice cracking. "I've been living with someone like this." His words weren't shouted, but everyone heard them. The betrayal in his tone sliced through the room more painfully than any accusation. Peyton turned toward him, reaching out, sobbing harder. "Austin, please, I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." But he didn't look at her. The man who once defended her now sat with his head bowed, eyes closed, as if praying for strength to believe this wasn't real. I watched in silence, my hands folded on my lap. I felt no triumph, only the heavy ache of truth at last revealed. The woman who once called me Mom now knelt on the cold tile floor. Her mask shattered her tears, mingling with the dust of her own lies. When the judge called my name, I rose slowly from the bench. Every movement felt deliberate, grounded not in pride, but in purpose. I walked toward the witness stand, the sound of my heels echoing softly against the marble floor. The courtroom fell into silence. The light from the high windows poured down across the room, catching the silver strands of my hair as I raised my right hand to take the oath. When I began to speak, my voice was calm, steady. the voice of a doctor used to explaining pain without letting emotion take over. I once believed I said my eyes resting briefly on Peyton that love could change a person. I've spent my life believing in healing, not punishment. But sometimes justice must finish what kindness cannot. A few people in the gallery shifted the weight of my words filling the room. I told the court how I had started noticing small inconsistencies, the lies about the nursing home, the strange taste in my food, the dizziness that came and went. I described keeping quiet, not out of fear, but out of a desperate hope that I was wrong. I recounted how Spencer Reed helped me collect the evidence lawfully, step by step. The recordings, the toxicology tests, the financial records, everything done properly without malice or revenge. As I spoke, I didn't raise my voice or point fingers. I simply stated the truth, the way one presents a diagnosis, factual, unavoidable. Peyton's shoulders shook as I described the night I realized what was happening, how I'd sat in the dark kitchen, whispering to myself that if my intuition was right, life as we knew it would never be the same. When I finished, I looked at the jury, then back at the judge. My voice softened. "I don't wish to see Peyton behind bars," I said. "But if I stay silent today, tomorrow, there may be another mother, another grandmother who won't wake up from her meal." The room was utterly still. I saw one juror wipe her eyes. Even the bailiff looked down for a moment, his jaw tight. The judge leaned forward slightly, his expression solemn yet gentle. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying through the courtroom, "you remind us why this system exists, not for vengeance, but for truth. You are the reason we still believe in the law." I nodded, a small, grateful smile crossing my face. For the first time in months, the ache in my chest felt lighter because the truth finally had spoken for itself. When the judge returned to the bench, the courtroom fell into a silence so deep that even the air seemed to hold its breath. His expression was grave but composed, the kind of calm that comes before a storm of truth. I sat perfectly still beside Spencer, my hands clasped together, watching as justice, slow, deliberate, and merciless, began to take shape. "The court," the judge began, voice steady, "finds the defendants, Charles Quinn and Peyton Walsh, guilty on all counts." He looked directly at the two of them, his tone sharp as the crack of the gavel. "Mr. Quinn is hereby sentenced to 25 years in state prison for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and attempted murder. His repeated pattern of manipulation and violence toward family members cannot and will not be excused." Charles barely reacted. His shoulders slumped, his mouth twisted in a smirk that dissolved when two officers moved forward to cuff him. As they led him away, the smell of stale alcohol seemed to linger in his wake, the scent of a life already wasted long before justice caught up. The judge then turned to Peyton. Her face was streaked with tears, her once perfectly styled hair clinging to her cheeks. "Mrs. Peyton Walsh," he continued, "this court sentences you to 18 years in state prison for second-degree attempted murder, forgery of legal documents, and embezzlement of marital assets. You planned and participated in acts of deceit and cruelty against the very person who welcomed you into her home. May this judgment remind you that love and trust are not to be weaponized." Peyton sobbed, her voice breaking into fragments as the bailiff took her by the arm. The clinking of handcuffs echoed across the room, cold, final, metallic. Around us, whispers rippled through the crowd. One woman in the back murmured, "Isn't that the sweet daughter-in-law who used to read Bible verses every Sunday?" Another shook her head. "I guess the devil wears faith when it needs to." Cameras flashed, recording every second of the downfall. The masks of piety and perfection were gone, replaced by the harsh glare of consequence. Austin sat frozen, his face pale, his jaw tight. When the officers began escorting Peyton out, She turned, searching for his eyes, but he didn't look up. He just stood, shoulders heavy, and walked toward me. I could feel his heart break in the tremor of his steps. He reached me, hesitated, then wrapped his arms around me tightly. His voice cracked against my shoulder. "Mom, I'm so sorry for being blind." I held him not as a victim, but as a mother who had survived the fire and still had love left to give. The cameras flashed again, but I no longer cared. The truth had already been spoken, and karma, swift and public, had done the rest. The verdict was final, and the air inside the courtroom felt heavier than stone. The gavel struck once, a sound so sharp it seemed to split the room in two. The judge's voice, calm yet unyielding, delivered the last words of the long trial. "Peyton Quinn," he said, "you are hereby sentenced to 18 years in the state penitentiary for attempted murder of an elderly person, forgery of legal documents, and embezzlement of marital assets." His tone was steady, almost sorrowful, but the words carried the weight of every betrayal she had built. Peyton's face crumpled. Her lips moved soundlessly at first, then her voice cracked open in a cry that echoed through the chamber. "Austin, Austin, please!" Her hands reached out trembling as the bailiff gripped her arms. The silver of the handcuffs flashed under the fluorescent lights, bright and merciless. Austin didn't move. He stood behind me, one hand clutching the back of my coat so tightly that I could feel the fabric strain. When she screamed his name again, he turned his head away. His voice was quiet, but final. "You made your choice, Peyton. Now you live with it." The judge continued, his voice steady as a metronome. "Charles Quinn is hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit elder murder and sexual abuse of a dependent adult." The courtroom gasped softly. Even after all the evidence, hearing it spoken aloud sent chills through the room. Charles barely reacted, just smirked, as if the world had finally confirmed what he already knew about himself. The guards stepped in and cuffed him. The reporters outside the courthouse swarmed like restless crows. As the doors opened and the officers led the prisoners down the steps, cameras flashed in a frenzy. The cold October wind whipped across Peyton's hair, tangling the strands that once framed her polished, saintly image. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not the confident woman who once called me mom, but someone hollowed out by her own greed. By noon, every television in Charleston seemed to play the same headline: "The fake saint woman, convicted of poisoning her doctor mother-in-law." Underneath, smaller text scrolled across the screen: "Justice served in one of South Carolina's most shocking family crimes." I stood outside the courthouse steps, the gray sky above me softening into the first hint of light rain. Spencer stood beside me, silent. Somewhere behind us, reporters called out for comments, but I didn't answer. My silence said enough. Justice had arrived, not early, not late, just in time. Within days, the case spread like wildfire. Charleston Daily News ran the story on its evening broadcast, calling it a wake-up call on elder abuse in middle-class families. The anchors spoke with solemn voices, the screen behind them flashing images that no one could look away from. On one side, a smiling Peyton in her pristine white church dress, Bible in hand, her eyes lifted in mock devotion. On the other, the same woman in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, her face streaked with mascara and regret. The contrast was enough to silence even those who had once defended her. The article accompanying the segment was relentless. Reporters dissected every detail: the secret bank transfers, the poison, the forged will. But what captivated the public wasn't just the crime. It was the betrayal beneath the surface, the way love had been weaponized behind the walls of a quiet suburban home. One journalist wrote, "There are crimes that use guns, and there are crimes that use kindness as a disguise. This one needed only a smile and a poisoned bowl of soup." By the next morning, the story had gone national. News websites and social media flooded with comments, videos, and opinion pieces. The headline, "The Fake Saint," became a viral symbol, a warning against the facade of virtue. Old neighbors were interviewed on local talk shows. One said, "She was always polite, always helping at bake sales. I never imagined she could harm anyone." Another added, "That's the danger evil rarely shouts, it whispers." Across Facebook and community forums, people began discussing elder exploitation, how manipulation often hides behind gestures of affection. Thousands of users shared a single quote from the court coverage that struck a nerve. "The greatest sin isn't betrayal, it's pretending to love while hiding it." The sentence spread beyond South Carolina, appearing in digital magazines, podcasts, even church sermons. It became not just commentary, but a mirror held up to every family who had buried silence under politeness. For me, watching it all unfold was surreal. My name, once known only in medical circles, was suddenly attached to headlines and hashtags. But I didn't feel shame, only a quiet sadness. The world was talking not about my suffering, but about the truth that had finally come out of it. The story had become bigger than me, bigger than Peyton or Charles. It had become a lesson written in the language of consequence. Justice had spoken in court, but now it was echoing through every screen and every home, a reminder that deceit, no matter how holy it looks, always carries its own price. After the trial, Austin requested an indefinite leave from the hospital. The chief of surgery tried to persuade him to stay, but his hands trembled every time he entered an operating room. The psychologist who evaluated him called it familial PTSD, the trauma that comes when betrayal happens inside one's own home. For a man who had saved strangers all his life, realizing he couldn't protect the people he loved most was a wound that didn't bleed, but never closed. He sold the big house where everything had fallen apart and moved into a modest cottage just a few blocks from mine. Every morning, I could hear the sound of his car engine warming up the soft laughter of Emma and Caleb as he buckled them into their seats. He drove them to school himself, packed their lunches, and learned to braid Emma's hair, clumsy at first, but she giggled and told him he was getting better. In the afternoons, they cooked together, the kitchen filled with the scent of butter, onions, and second chances. At night, when the world grew quiet, I sometimes saw the lights in his window still burning. He sat by the edge of the children's beds watching them sleep, his face softened by guilt and love. More than once, I overheard his whisper, barely audible through the thin walls, "I promise I won't let anyone hurt you again." His voice trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of a vow he meant to keep. I never blamed him. Grief already had done enough. When he came over one evening, eyes red from exhaustion, he said, "Mom, I don't know how to make this right." I placed my hand over his. "You already are," I told him. "Justice doesn't always come to punish. Sometimes it comes to remind us to cherish who's still here." He didn't answer, but the way his shoulders eased told me he finally understood. The following months moved slowly, tenderly. Austin joined a support group for families of abuse survivors. He volunteered at a local clinic on weekends, offering free checkups for the elderly. He told me one day, "I used to think being a doctor meant saving lives in hospitals. Now I think it means helping people live better after the pain." Watching him heal was like watching winter turn into spring, quiet, gradual, but undeniable. The wounds of deceit had carved deep, but love in its truest form was starting to mend them. After the trial, my life didn't return to normal. It transformed into something quieter, but stronger. One morning, Spencer called and asked if I would join him in a project he had been building for years, Protecting the Elders, a nonprofit dedicated to helping senior citizens who were victims of emotional or financial abuse. "You don't have to fight alone anymore," he said. "Now you can help others fight back too." I agreed without hesitation. For the first time, the pain I had carried found a purpose. They made me an honorary advisor, a title that sounded formal, but meant something deeply human. I met elderly women and men who had been betrayed by their own families, stories that mirrored mine in different shapes. We sat together over tea, exchanging silences that spoke louder than words. I taught them how to document transactions, how to trust their instincts, how to protect their dignity when the world tried to take it away. Every meeting reminded me that healing wasn't just surviving, it was transforming pain into guidance for others. Soon after, the Charleston Herald invited me to write a weekly column titled Silent Sufferers. I wrote in simple language like a conversation between friends. I talked about subtle manipulation, the harmless requests for money, the guilt tactics disguised as affection, the fear of being alone that makes elders tolerate cruelty. I ended each piece with the same line: silence protects the abuser, not the victim. The column gained traction fast. Letters began arriving from other towns from women who said, "You told my story." People began recognizing me in grocery stores and church aisles. Some called me Dr. Mitchell, others simply Daisy. They would smile, sometimes tearfully, and say, "You gave me courage." I didn't see myself as a hero, just a woman who refused to let her story end in bitterness. My hair had grown whiter, but my eyes, as people often told me, were brighter than ever. At a community seminar months later, Spencer introduced me as the guest of honor. Standing beside the podium, he said, "Daisy didn't win because she's clever. She won because she never stopped believing in justice." The audience applauded softly, some rising to their feet. I smiled, not the smile of triumph, but of peace. In that moment, I realized the truest victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was here, in the quiet rooms, where people dared to speak again, where truth could heal what fear once silenced. In prison, karma arrived not as thunder, but as silence, slow, cold, and inescapable. Peyton learned quickly that behind those walls, reputation carried a different weight. The other inmates refused to sit with her at meals. Some spat when she passed. To them, poisoning one's own mother-in-law, an older woman who had done no harm, was the lowest act imaginable. The irony was cruel. The same woman who had once worn white dresses to church and spoke about grace now found herself alone, shunned even by those who had stolen, lied, and killed. Weeks turned into months. Peyton began writing letters to the judge, to Spencer, and finally to me. The letters arrived through her prison counselor, filled with shaky handwriting and tear stains. "I wake up every night hearing your voice," she wrote once. "I'm sorry for everything. Please tell Austin I was weak, not evil." I never answered. Some silences are not cruelty, they are truth. Forgiveness is not owed, it must be earned, and Peyton had a lifetime to understand that. Charles, on the other hand, never wrote a word. Prison stripped away the arrogance that had carried him all his life. Without alcohol to numb him, the ghosts came quickly. He stopped eating, stopped speaking, and within 2 years his body gave out cirrhosis, the report said. But those who saw him in his final days said he died long before his liver failed, hollowed out by guilt and rot from within. The world simply caught up to what he'd already become. Outside, life moved forward. The house that had once been Peyton's stage for deceit, with its manicured lawn and spotless facade, was seized by the court to pay legal fees and restitution. Spencer bought the property through a charitable trust and turned it into something new, the Elder Awareness Center. Its brass sign shone under the Charleston sun, and beneath it, in smaller letters, a quote from my column: "Dignity has no expiration date." Each week, elderly visitors came to attend workshops about financial safety, mental health, and family boundaries. They walked through the same kitchen where betrayal had once brewed, now repainted and filled with laughter. The poison was gone. The lesson remained. Sometimes I stood outside the building watching people enter. I didn't feel pride, just quiet gratitude that something good had grown from the ashes. If you are listening now, wherever you are, remember this: your story matters. Speak it, even if your voice shakes. Share it, even if the world doubts you. Old age is not weakness, it is wisdom wrapped in time. No one, no matter how powerful or cunning, has the right to make you feel small.